I woke up to a blinding light and a ringing in my ears. Pain shot through my abdomen, sharp enough to make me gasp and cling to the edges of the stretcher. My hands trembled, not just from the blood loss, but from sheer panic. Lily and Lucas, my 3-year-old twins, they were at home. Safe, I hoped, but for how long? The ambulance swerved around a corner. My vision blurred. I couldn't remember the moment before the crash clearly. One second, I was driving home after a 16-hour shift at the hospital, exhaustion pulling at my eyelids, and the next, the world had exploded into metal, glass, and sirens. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with blood, and called the one number I hoped would answer. Dad. Mom. Someone. Anyone. Please, I whispered between gritted teeth. My twins. Just for a few hours. The line rang 4 times. 4. Then a voice, sharp and impatient. We're about to leave. What is it now? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I need you. I'm in an accident. I'm going to the hospital. Please watch Lily and Lucas, just for a few hours. Silence. Then muffled voices. My mother, her tone clipped and annoyed. Vanessa, laughing in the background. And then the text. Family group chat. You've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself. I read it again, hoping my eyes were deceiving me. But no. My own parents, the people who were supposed to be my safety net, had chosen a concert over their bleeding daughter? Vanessa, my sister, grinned somewhere in Milan or New York, somewhere distant from the reality that I might not live another hour. I blinked, disoriented, and the world tilted. Rage and grief collided in my chest like twin storms. But beneath the anger, a strange clarity emerged. I would survive this. I had to survive this. Marcus, the emergency physician riding beside me, looked down at me with calm concern. Myra, can you hear me? Yes, I rasped, gripping the edge of the stretcher. The kids, Lily and Lucas, the babysitter, she leaves at 8. I need someone, please. He didn't flinch. He just nodded. We'll make sure they're safe. Focus on you. I let out a shuddering breath as the sirens cut through the night. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. For the first time in my life, I was completely on my own. Not just with my accident, but with my family. The thing is, this wasn't new. I'd grown up being invisible in my own household. The Carver household had a hierarchy, and I'd learned my place early. Vanessa, my older sister by 3 years, was the golden child. Every smile, every accomplishment, every breath she took was praised, celebrated, and elevated. When she said she wanted to pursue fashion design, my mother cried tears of joy. Dad called her our visionary. When I said I wanted to become a doctor, Dad nodded politely. Practical. That was it. Practical. That was the summation of my worth in their eyes. I buried myself in textbooks, driven by a stubborn need to prove that I mattered, even if they wouldn't acknowledge it. 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency in cardiology. Every milestone a silent testament that I could stand on my own. But even then, the small victories never counted for much. My graduation? My parents arrived 2 hours late. No flowers, no celebration dinner, just a parking lot photo taken quickly so they could rush Vanessa to some urgent meeting. That was my reward for a decade of dedication. And it had been worse than emotional neglect. My parents' favoritism came at a financial cost that I carried silently for 8 years. Mortgage payments, health insurance, car repairs. Everything I quietly paid for without complaint. $2,400 here, $800 there. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowed from my account into their comfort, all while I scrambled to raise my own life and eventually my twins. I never expected acknowledgement. I never expected gratitude. But being called a burden while bleeding in an ambulance, that cut deeper than any injury the crash could inflict. The reality of my life hit me fully as the paramedics slid me onto the gurney. My phone was dying, so I used Marcus's. In 4 minutes, I located a 24-hour emergency nanny service, authorized triple the rate, and arranged for Lily and Lucas to be safe. Strangers, complete strangers, had done more for my children in that moment than the people who were supposed to be their grandparents. And yet, even as I drifted into the haze of pain and IV morphine in the hospital, I felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation. My hands were shaking as they operated on me, but my heart was steadier than it had been in years. I had made a decision that would change everything. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer be exploited. I would survive, and when I did, I would no longer carry the weight of people who could never see my value. I had no idea what the fallout would be, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I realized that strength didn't mean enduring silently. Strength meant choosing yourself when everyone else had abandoned you. And so, bleeding, in pain, staring at the ceiling of an ER room, I began to imagine a life where I was finally the protagonist, not the side character who quietly paid bills and endured neglect. The protagonist. Flashbacks came in fragments. I remembered my first experience of betrayal, my father calling me late at night. "We're in a bind. Can you cover the mortgage this month?" "One-time favor," he said, "just this once." But once became a habit, and over 8 years, $364,200 had quietly left my account. Every emergency, every bill, every indulgence for Vanessa, all of it quietly funded by me and none of it ever acknowledged. I remembered the moment I gave birth to Lily and Lucas, scared, alone, and in need. My parents had never been there, not for the birth, not for the sleepless nights that followed, and yet the transfers continued. A quiet, insidious pattern of give, 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 and remain invisible. It was in the middle of this haze of memory and pain that the first fire of resolve was lit. I would not be invisible anymore, and I would make sure that the people who called me a burden finally understood the truth of my worth. As the anesthetic began to take hold, as my eyes closed and my mind drifted, a single thought anchored me. When I wake up, things will never be the same. And in the quiet chaos of the ER, with strangers tending to my children and my parents nowhere to be seen, I realized the first terrifying, liberating truth. My life had been a lie, and it was time for the reckoning. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness wasn't the pain, it was my phone buzzing again. A new notification from the family group chat. I hesitated, knowing it might be venom, but curiosity burned hotter than fear. I tapped the screen, and my heart sank. "Myra, you've always been a nuisance and a burden. We have Taylor Swift tickets with Vanessa tonight. Figure it out yourself." And just like that, everything I had believed about family, loyalty, and love cracked open like shattered glass. When I woke, the fluorescent lights of the hospital burned my eyes like tiny suns. The pain was still there, gnawing at my ribs, but my first thought wasn't about the crash. It was about my twins, Lily and Lucas. Were they okay? Safe? I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaky, and opened the Nanny Services app. A confirmation blinked on the screen. "Lily and Lucas are safe. Your nanny will remain with them until further notice." Relief hit me in waves, but it was fleeting. The next notification was from the Carver family chat. My hands froze over the screen, my pulse quickening. "Where are you? The tickets are wasting away. Vanessa's getting anxious. Don't forget, you're useless anyway." The words stabbed me like knives. Every insult, every snide remark over the years, every moment I had been dismissed as the dumb one or a burden, all of it converged into a single burning point of rage. My parents weren't just neglectful, they were actively cruel. I tried to focus on the present, to calm my mind and let the nurses handle my IVs and pain meds. But the truth was unavoidable. The crash hadn't been an accident, at least not entirely. My car had been tampered with. Someone loosened the brake lines. At first, it felt insane to think my family would stoop so low, but the subtle patterns were there. Vanessa had been obsessed with me losing my edge, the small accidents that seemed like coincidence, the constant undermining of my confidence. And then the realization hit me. This wasn't just neglect. This was a targeted attack. I remembered the week before, Vanessa had borrowed my credit card to pay for a private flight to Paris. When I had questioned her, Dad had laughed. "You worry too much. She's your sister. She's just ambitious." And yet, as I had checked my statements after the crash, there were irregular transactions I didn't recognize. A series of large cash withdrawals, odd deposits, and even a few charges to businesses I had never visited. Someone was building a map of my finances, maybe even trying to control me. It made sense now why my own parents had never intervened when I asked for help, even when I had quietly carried the financial weight of the household. Every loan, every transfer, every favor, they didn't care about me. They only cared that I remained trapped in their invisible chains. As the nurses adjusted my bandages, I felt a cold, burning clarity. Vanessa had orchestrated a pattern of humiliation and sabotage. My accident had been a culmination of years of being dismissed and targeted. My life had always been a chessboard, and I had been nothing more than a pawn. I knew I couldn't stay passive anymore. Every instinct screamed at me: survive, observe, plan. Revenge, perhaps, wasn't the goal yet. Understanding was. I needed to know the full extent of their deceit. Hours later, after I was discharged, I returned home to the quiet chaos of my apartment. Lily and Lucas clung to me, unaware of the storm behind my eyes. The nanny smiled, handed me the twins' bottles, and left after ensuring they had everything. I locked the door, cradling my children, and stared at the walls of my living room. That's when the first real clue appeared. My laptop, which I always kept in my bedroom, was open, and on the screen was a folder labeled Family Secrets. My hands shook. Who? Why? I clicked. Inside were hundreds of files, scanned signatures, financial statements, personal emails, and even videos of my parents and Vanessa plotting. Their laughter echoed from the speakers. "She'll never notice. She's too naive. Let her crash and burn, and we get everything." My stomach turned. The reality was unbearable. My family had been systematically controlling, monitoring, and undermining me for years. They had watched me bleed, both literally and figuratively, and never once lifted a finger to help. Worse, they seemed to revel in my pain. I remembered the first betrayal that truly shaped me, the time I had saved up for a medical licensing exam, putting myself through extra shifts and scrimping every penny, only to have my parents take the funds under the guise of family emergency. I had worked tirelessly to maintain some control over my life, yet every attempt was stolen, manipulated, or erased. Now, confronted with undeniable evidence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. Knowledge is a weapon, and I held the blueprint of my family's deceit in my hands. I could feel the gears turning in my mind. If they thought they could control me, manipulate me, and profit from my submission, they had gravely underestimated me. But revenge would require patience. One misstep and the balance would tip against me. I needed allies, or at least leverage. My first step was gathering all the evidence and securing it in multiple places. I copied every file to encrypted drives, emailed backups to secure accounts, and even printed hard copies of the most damning documents. And yet, I couldn't act yet. Vanessa and my parents were unpredictable. Any sudden confrontation could trigger a counterattack. The realization was chilling. My life and the life of my children hung in the balance. That evening, as I prepared dinner for Lily and Lucas, a small notification blinked on my phone, a number I didn't recognize. I answered hesitantly. Myra Carver. The voice was smooth, almost casual, but there was an undertone of danger. I froze. Who is this? You don't know us, but we know everything about your family, about the crash, about the schemes. We want to help, but you have to trust no one else. My grip on the phone tightened. Every instinct told me to hang up, but part of me, the part that had survived every humiliation, every betrayal, every manipulation, knew I had no choice. I'm listening, I said, voice low but steady. Tell me what you know. The voice continued. Your parents aren't just neglectful. They've built a system, a network of control. And Vanessa, she's the most dangerous of all. But there's more, Myra, much more. If you're willing, we can expose them completely. As the call ended, I felt my pulse race. My mind spun with possibilities. Evidence, strategy, exposure. For the first time in my life, the tables were turning. But the fear didn't disappear. The danger was real. My family had already proven they would stop at nothing. And yet, for the first time, I smiled. Because now, I wasn't just a pawn. I was awake. I was aware. And I was ready. The following days were a blur of quiet observation and careful planning. I stayed close to Lily and Lucas, never letting my guard down, while simultaneously digging into the trove of files I had uncovered. Every document, every email, every video clip revealed more than I had imagined. Vanessa's ambitions weren't just selfish, they were predatory. I discovered that for years she had siphoned money from family accounts, created fake contracts, and even falsified my signatures on minor loans to maintain leverage. But the most shocking revelation came when I opened a folder labeled Property and Assets. My parents had secretly mortgaged almost everything I thought I owned. The house, the cars, even the small inheritance from Grandma. I realized the crash, the mockery, the constant belittling, it had all been part of a long-term plan to isolate me financially, emotionally, and socially. The phone call from the mysterious ally, someone who claimed to know everything, kept replaying in my mind. I had hesitated to trust them, but I now understood why they reached out. I needed guidance, someone outside the twisted network of my family's manipulation. Late that night, I set up a small workstation in my bedroom, surrounded by laptops, encrypted drives, and printed files. I traced transactions, mapped communications, and noted every suspicious pattern. Each discovery was like peeling back a layer of deceit I hadn't realized was so deep. Vanessa wasn't acting alone. There were lawyers, financial advisors, and even distant relatives subtly aiding her schemes. It was terrifying to see how carefully they had engineered my life, but also empowering. The more I knew, the more I could fight back. Then the unexpected happened. A knock at the door. My heart jumped. I peeked through the peephole. No one was there. Just a small envelope slid under the door. Inside, a USB stick and a handwritten note. They're watching. Be careful. Start with this. Plugging in the USB, I found encrypted files, video recordings of Vanessa meeting with unknown men, discussing my accident, my finances, and even potential removal strategies for anyone who might interfere. She wasn't just cruel, she was ruthless. Every laugh, every smirk I remembered from my childhood, every time she dismissed my efforts as useless, now made sense. It wasn't just jealousy, it was calculation. I also discovered evidence of another betrayal that shook me to the core. My parents had promised to support my education and career, but they had deliberately sabotaged applications, forged recommendation letters, and even blacklisted me in networks I needed to advance. Everything they claimed to do for my own good had been a lie, a veneer to hide a decades-long scheme of control. As I pieced this together, I realized one thing clearly. I could no longer be passive. Myra, the obedient, naive daughter, was gone. In her place stood someone alert, strategic, and determined. The betrayal was deep, but so was the opportunity to turn their schemes against them. But the risk was enormous. Vanessa and my parents were unpredictable and dangerous. One misstep could cost me everything: my home, my children, even my life. I couldn't act openly. I needed to be clever, invisible, and patient. By the end of that week, I had mapped every connection, documented every crime, and prepared a secure plan. I knew the next step wouldn't just be about exposing them. It would be about reclaiming my life, safeguarding Lily and Lucas, and ensuring that no one would ever control me again. As I sat in the dark, watching my children sleep, I made a silent vow. Vanessa and my parents thought they had crushed me, kept me weak, and trapped me in a web of lies. They were wrong. From now on, I would move like a shadow, calm, deliberate, and unstoppable. The time for fear was over. The time for action was approaching. And I would be ready. The moment I had been preparing for had arrived. Every observation, every document, every secret I had uncovered was about to be put into action. But I knew I couldn't rush. One wrong move, one visible clue, and Vanessa or my parents would destroy me before I even had a chance. Patience was my weapon now. I started small. The first step was financial, securing what little remained under my control. I quietly transferred accounts to a new bank, set up hidden safety funds, and changed passwords. Vanessa had always assumed I was naive with money, but now I was the ghost in their system, untouchable and invisible. Every small victory gave me a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in years. Next, I tested their reactions. A few subtle inquiries, planted questions, and tiny disruptions in their carefully orchestrated plans. Vanessa's first reaction was predictable: frustration and anger thinly masked with false smiles. My parents pretended ignorance, but I could see the tension in their eyes. For the first time, they realized I was no longer the powerless daughter they could control. Then came the emotional gambit. I arranged a casual meeting with Lily, pretending nothing had changed, but I subtly guided her toward questions about Vanessa's behavior. Lily, perceptive and loyal, began noticing patterns she had never seen before. The cracks in Vanessa's armor were appearing. Each time Lily asked a pointed question, Vanessa fumbled, slipped, or over-explained. Their family dynamics, once a fortress of deception, were starting to fracture. Meanwhile, I worked with my mysterious ally to gather more tangible evidence: hidden cameras, recordings, and paper trails, all documented in a secure, untraceable cloud system. Every bribe, every manipulation, every backhanded scheme was cataloged. I realized that revenge wasn't about confrontation alone, it was about undeniable proof. When the time came, there would be no argument, no plausible deniability. One night, I executed a carefully calculated move. I sent an anonymous tip to a financial regulator about a minor, yet suspicious, transaction Vanessa had orchestrated. I watched from the shadows as panic set in across the family. Vanessa called frantic meetings, checked emails obsessively, and tried to cover tracks. I stayed calm, knowing this was only the beginning. Even my parents weren't immune. Their old tactics of guilt and manipulation failed to sway me. I realized they were as trapped in their own web of lies as Vanessa. They had underestimated me for years, and that mistake was now their weakness. I had become the observer, the planner, the one with the upper hand. By the end of the week, the tension in the house was palpable. Conversations shorter, smiles forced, and Vanessa's charm no longer masked fear. I felt a thrill I had never experienced before: control. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was dictating the pace, the rules, and the stakes. But I knew better to celebrate prematurely. The family that had thrived on manipulation and deceit wouldn't fall easily. The first strike was only a test, a message that I was no longer the powerless pawn. The real confrontation, the one that would expose every lie, reclaim every stolen asset, and dismantle Vanessa's empire, was still ahead. And when it came, I would be ready. The day of Grandpa Thomas's birthday arrived, and I felt a quiet storm inside me. Everything, the folder, the records, the subtle manipulations, led to this room, this exact moment. The colonial estate gleamed under the morning sun, the kind of perfection my parents had always pretended to live in. I arrived early, twins in tow, dressed in understated navy, blending elegance with authority. No grand gestures, no theatrics, just truth. The party buzzed with polite chatter and the hum of the string quartet. My parents were already there, polished and confident, expecting the usual facade to protect them. Vanessa floated around, the perfect sister, the flawless image. But I could see the tension beneath her polished exterior, the small jerks of her hands, the barely suppressed glances toward me. They were sensing the shift. Grandpa Thomas stood at the center of the room, commanding attention as effortlessly as he had in his courtroom. He gave a subtle nod, and I stepped forward. My hands were steady as I placed the folder on the central table. The room quieted. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. "Before we celebrate, there are some truths that need to be shared," Grandpa began, his voice measured. "Facts that cannot be ignored." He opened the folder. "For 8 years, Myra Whitmore has been supporting this household. Mortgage payments, insurance, car repairs, emergency funds, all while raising twins and completing her medical residency. The total exceeds $360,000. A collective gasp filled the room. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face went pale. Vanessa's designer smile faltered. The murmurs swelled into whispers. I watched silently, twins playing at my side, the folder a quiet monument to years of exploitation. Grandpa continued, reading messages from the ambulance night, the infamous text declaring me a burden while I bled internally. Vanessa's eyes widened and her mouth opened, but no words came. My parents' pleas for context were drowned out by the undeniable evidence. No explanation could mask years of indifference. I finally spoke, calm, strong, and resolute. I didn't come here for revenge. I came because for 34 years I lived in a version of my family that wasn't real. I was convenient, exploitable, and invisible. And while I survived, I also paid for their comfort. The room was silent. Some relatives nodded, others whispered. Grandpa's eyes softened. He said, "Facts speak for themselves." My parents couldn't meet my gaze. Vanessa slumped, no longer the untouchable star. I didn't know," she whispered, tears forming. "I was blind." "Yes, you were blind, and now you see." After the revelation, chaos followed, but not the type anyone expected. My parents stormed out, humiliated, scrambling for control over a reality they no longer ruled. Vanessa quietly disappeared into a corner, sobbing, a humbled shell of her former arrogance. Family members approached me, not to console, but to validate, to finally acknowledge what had always been true. Aunt Eleanor hugged me, whispering, "You did the right thing." Life shifted in subtle but permanent ways. The family group chat vanished, financial support ceased, and my parents faced real consequences: unpaid bills, mortgage struggles, and a reality they had long ignored. Vanessa's career faltered under her newfound humility, while my children thrived, shielded from a toxic legacy. The final twist came unexpectedly. Weeks later, a call from Vanessa, shaky and remorseful, led to a quiet reconciliation of sorts. Not full forgiveness, some wounds can never fully heal, but acknowledgement. She admitted, finally, that what I had known all along, that love cannot be bought and respect cannot be demanded. I returned to my apartment, watching the sunset with Lily and Lucas laughing nearby. The chaos had passed, but the lesson remained. I had chosen myself, demanded truth, and reclaimed control. Life was quieter, freer, and more honest. Boundaries were drawn. Love and support were now conditional, earned, not assumed. And in the stillness, I realized the greatest victory wasn't in humiliation or revenge. It was survival, clarity, and the peace of knowing that for the first time, my family saw me as I truly was.